Hey guys, so in this class we're going to be weighting the skin. So we've already bound the skin to the joints, or to the skeleton. So now we have to actually add weights to certain areas of the skin. So if we select the geometry, under the rigging menu set, if we go to skin, we'll select paint skin weights tool, and then you can see it appears in your toolbar here. If you don't already have the tool settings, you want to double click on the tool here in the toolbar. Alright, so as soon as you do that, you can see it lists all your joints at the top. So we can click on any one of these and you'll see that it highlights the joint in blue. This is why it's important to name your joints so we know which one we're painting on. So we'll be doing this a lot. We'll be changing our bone selection so that we can paint in the proper areas, the specified areas that we want to paint. Some of these other options at the bottom, copy weights of selected vertices, paste weights. If you hover over any one of these, you'll see what the function is. But to be honest with you, I don't really use any of these very often. You want to leave mode on paint. Under paint operation, this is one of the areas we'll be switching up a lot. Replace and scale I almost never use. We're really just going to be using add and smooth. So we'll be switching back and forth between adding and smoothing. I like to leave the profile on this brush setting. And these weight type and normalized weights, you can just leave them alone. And the other thing we'll be using a lot is opacity. This opacity slider, we'll be changing that a lot. Value, I'll just leave at 1. And color ramp, this is something that I'll toggle on and off. For the most part, I keep it on this setting. But the use color ramp is handy to use, and I'll explain what these are as I'm painting the first joint. And then the other setting that we use a lot is stroke radius. We'll be changing this quite a bit as well. Alright, so let's get started. We'll start painting the first joint. I'm just going to start at the knee. So we'll just select that knee joint, and you want to have your X-ray joints toggled on, just so you can see the joints through the geometry. And we'll hit E on the keyboard and rotate that. So when we rotate it, you'll see that it sort of collapses a little bit in the pit of the knee. So we're going to actually paint that out so that both sides of the knee pit touch, just to get a nice deformation. And we only have to do one side of the body. We're just going to work on the left side of the body, and later on we're going to mirror the skin weights to the other side. So we want to select the geometry first, and then we want to go back to our paint skin weights tool here. We already have it sitting in our toolbar, so you can just click on that, and now we can paint weights. And you'll see the model turn white and black. If we go back up here to the top, we have our left upper leg selected, so that's the hip joint here. So the wider this area is, the more weight is being applied by that joint. So you can see as we get further down the leg, it just sort of tapers off into gray and then black. So there's less weight or no weight being applied over here by that joint, and all the weight's being applied in the thigh area. So as we get down to the pit of the knee, we want to actually add weights to this area just to close up this gap. So right now my brush is a little bit too big. I'm just going to change the brush size a little bit, and I'm going to keep it on add. I'm just going to go to my brush radius and we'll change that to 0.1. That's probably pretty good. So you always want to be changing the brush size for different areas. So when we get to the fingers, for example, you want the brush size to be pretty small. Alright, so we can just start painting, and I'll explain how this works. You want to be painting the area on the joint that comes before the joint you're painting on. So right now we're on the knee, but we're actually painting on the hip joint. So when we go to paint this area, we'll actually have to select the knee. So if we select the knee here in the skin weights tool, the white area switches to the calf. So this whole white area is being heavily weighted by the knee. So let's go back to the hip joint. Alright, so we'll just start painting out this area, and you'll see how it works. So you can see that when I left mouse button click and drag over these areas, it's actually adding weight. It's increasing the weight that the hip bone has on this geometry that I'm painting. But that's too extreme. What controls the amount of weight that your paintbrush has is the value down here. So we can turn the value way down, for example, and if I paint now, you can see that it only gives us smaller increments. And I'm going to Control Z that, and I'll bring the value way down, just to a very small amount. And if I paint now, you can see it just barely moves it. So I'll Control Z those two strokes. What I like to do is just keep the value at 1, and I'll just control the opacity. So the opacity actually lessens the effect that the brush has. And I'll just keep sliding the opacity back and forth. So I'll keep the opacity way down around here, something like that. And then I'll just start painting out this area. Now don't worry about getting it perfect right away. It's going to look a little bit bulky at first, but we're going to smooth it out in a minute. You get pretty quick at it after a while. So you want to get right to the corner there. So you want to get it something like that. And then we'll go to the knee. We'll paint the weights on the other side. So you don't want to have your opacity up too high because it's going to get really bulgy if you do that. And you want to also be careful that you don't paint anything on the other side of the model, because you'll end up adding weights from the left knee to the right knee. Alright, so just keep going until you have that skin touching, and then we're going to use the smooth tool now. Remember, we still have our opacity down, so it's going to decrease the effect of the smooth tool. So we want to bring our opacity up, and I find that about a third of the way up it works well. If I go in close, you'll see that I'm making very small increments. So sometimes that gets a little bit tedious. We want to drag that opacity up a little bit and smooth it out a little bit faster. And you can see how it just sort of averages the weights. So you can see I'm making very small adjustments, just sort of being careful not to make things too bulgy and taking my time with it, making sure I get a nice rounded crease. Now I can't really see inside the model unless I actually zoom in to go inside the model. Sometimes that's something that you need to do. So I'll smooth both sides out. And now I'll go back to the upper leg and I'll smooth that out a little bit. Again, I can do it over here as well. So another option here in the tool settings is the color ramp. So if we click on that, it shows us the weight influence just in a different way. It shows us in colors. So red would be max influence, and then it tapers off from yellow, green, and blue is very little to no influence at all, and then black is none. It's just another way to visually show you exactly where weight's being applied to the character, but usually I'd have it turned off. Alright, so we'll continue smoothing this area. Select that left knee. Q on the keyboard for the selection tool. Alright, so let's have a look at what we did. Now it's good to turn off the X-ray joints just to have a good look at it. And now we can rotate this and see the effect. Okay, so it's a little bit better. And now since we froze transformations on the rotation values for the joints, I can just set this back to 0 and it goes right back to its default bind pose. So I bent the knee this much and painted it. What I would do next is just go down a little bit further and paint this out and get that a little bit closer, just so the deformation has a little bit more of a sharper edge here, or a sharper corner. Paint skin weights tool, and we're going to choose add, and I'll bring the opacity way down. So again, we're adding knee joint weight to the geometry on this side of the leg. If you paint on this side here, you're going to be taking weight away from the hip joint, and it pushes it in, which is not the desired effect. We only want to add weight to the knee joint on this side of the joint. Again, just adding little bits at a time. You can get it as rounded as you can. It's going to be a little bit lumpy at first, and then we'll go to the upper leg, perhaps give that a little bit more weight, just so that they're touching a little better. And now we're going to smooth it out. We'll just crank the smooth up a little bit, and you can see if it's making a really small difference. So we want to crank that opacity up a little bit more, so it makes more of a difference. And when I'm smoothing, I'll generally increase the radius of the brush a little bit, just so we get a bigger area, and we're affecting more of the points. So again, I want to bring that opacity up a little bit more, so you can see how you're constantly making adjustments to the brush size and the opacity, adding weight and then smoothing it out after. You don't want to smooth too much because it'll actually put it back closer to how it was before you painted it, so you just want to take it easy on the smoothing and just smooth it a little bit at a time. So we're only adding weight to one side at a time, and then we can smooth both sides. So I'm going to head back up to my knee now, and we'll smooth that side. You always want to smooth out both sides of each crease. So let's hit Q on the keyboard, or just click on your selection tool, and we'll turn X-ray joints off for a minute. We'll click off in space here just to take a look at it. That's looking pretty good. If I select the joint, we can actually preview how it folds, and that's creasing pretty nice. So again, before I start painting weights on the foot, I just want to bend it around a little bit and see where it deforms the worst. So really, in reality, we can't really bend our foot that way too much. So that's not too bad. There's probably not much work to do there, but actually we got a pretty good bind right off the bat. So that's actually pretty good. All right, and that's looking pretty unnatural. So we're probably gonna paint some weights in the back here. Yeah, we're gonna have to paint out that heel a little bit too. So let's bend it about as far as you think a foot can naturally bend in that direction. And then we'll select the geometry again, click on our weights tool. Let's go to the knee and see the effect that it's having. So you can see there's some weights here from the knee joint, but if we want to get rid of weighting from the knee joint, we have to actually add weight to the ankle joint. So I'm going to increase my brush size here. Again, we want to paint away from the other side of the model. I need to paint this whole area out at full opacity because that whole part of the back foot was totally collapsing. Now again, we're adding weight to the ankle joint just in this area. So now I want it to sort of blend in and have a nice transition here. So we'll turn our opacity down and we'll make smaller adjustments. Turn the opacity down some more. I want to get a nice crease here, just like we did with the knee. So I'm going to bring my brush size down a little bit. So we want to slowly add weight, just a little bit at a time. So we don't want to go too far over here on this side. We're going to go back to the knee joint to get this side of the ankle. Alright, so let's go back to the knee joint while we have our brush a little bit bigger still. And we'll add to this side. So you can see this was all collapsing quite a bit. You can undo any of these brush strokes. If you make a stroke then you don't like it, you can hit Ctrl-Z to undo that brush stroke. Alright, so now we want to bring our brush size down, just so we can get in there a little bit tighter. And let's bring the opacity down a little bit too, just so we're making smaller adjustments now, just to close up this gap. Again, don't worry about getting it perfect at this point because we're going to be smoothing it out. I'll generally add a little bit more than I think I need because the smooth tool will average the points out and it'll actually take away. So I'll add a little bit more. Again, we can just go back to the ankle. Just make sure we've added all that we need. So hopefully we can just use the smooth tool after this and not have to go back and add any more. But sometimes you do have to. Alright, so let's just start smoothing this out. So we'll click on smooth and let's bring the opacity up a little bit. So we're just going to figure out the right amount of opacity. So you can see that's doing almost nothing. So we'll drag the opacity up a little bit more. And I want to increase, at this point when I'm smoothing, I want to increase the brush radius. I'll bring that to 1. And you can see it's the same general workflow for each joint, each problem area. Alright, so I'm on the ankle joint. I'm going to go right back to the knee joint and we'll smooth that on both sides. And you can even zoom to get inside the model. And you can see how your crease is taking shape on the inside. Q on the keyboard, toggle off the X-ray joints and we'll have a look at that. It looks pretty good. So I think it's bending well in the rotate X. I'm just going to zero that out and let's rotate it in Z. There's a little bit of collapsing that's happening here. So we'll just fix that up. I'm just going to go as far, maybe a little bit farther than I think he'll ever bend his foot that way. And we'll just paint that gap out. So again, selecting your geometry and going to the paint weights tool. Now I don't have to do a lot here, so I'm going to bring the opacity way down. You always want to orbit around and just see how it's taking shape. So now if I want to paint weights on this other side where it's black, I actually have to go to the ankle joint. We'll just uncollapse that side a little bit by adding some ankle joint weight to this part of the geometry. And now let's just smooth this all out. So I'll bring my opacity back up again. Okay, so I'm going to hit Q on the keyboard. So we're actually going to go just a little bit less. We'll make sure it's looking good at this degree of rotation. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. You just want to watch out for any sharp corners. Just make sure everything looks nice and smooth and rounded. And you get a nice sharp crease in the middle here. Alright, so I think that ankle is going to be fine. Alright, so let's just keep working on the leg for now. I'm going to work on this hip area a little bit, and we'll probably have to come back to it. But I'm just going to do a little bit of work on it now and get it as close as I can. So a lot of times we'll bend it to the point where the crease doesn't totally collapse, because it's hard to paint this way when it's deformed too much. So a lot of times what I'll do is just go to a certain degree, paint it out, do some work on it this way, and then move it up a little bit more. So we'll just go up to about here for now. So we'll select the geometry, hit our paint tool. You can see how the front of his abdomen is sort of collapsed, but I don't want to paint on the wrong joint. See, if I paint on this area with the hip joint, it goes in more. So I'm just going to take a look at the root for a minute and see if I can get this fixed with the root. So I have the root selected here in my weights tool, and I'm just going to paint a small area. I can see that it does actually bring it out a little bit. This area can be a little tricky. We're likely going to have to go back and revisit this later on. And just keep smoothing the area out until you see you get a nice edge flow coming around the hip area, and you always want to make sure that you're paying attention to the mesh and making sure that your edge flow is nice. You can see we have a nice curved area, how it comes around the crease of the leg and into the crotch area here. You want to always pay attention to your edge flow, just like when you're modeling. It's good for now, and we'll revisit it later. So we're just going to bring the leg back. We'll make some adjustments to the bum area here. So we're going to add some weights to the root. So when it turns white like that, that's pretty much, it's maxed out the weight that you can put in that area, and that's as far as it's going to go. Alright, so let's work on the armpit. So I'm just going to go down on about a 45-degree angle, and then we'll fix what we have here. We bent the shoulder down, and we have the armpit collapsing here, which is a really common occurrence in any model. The armpit area almost always collapses. We're going to actually add some left clavicle weight to the armpit area. Okay, I'm going to decrease my brush size so I can get in that tight area. And now I'll go to the shoulder joint. Sorry, we have the left clavicle there named improperly. And we'll add weight to that, just to uncollapse it some more. You can see both sides are sort of going into each other. They're intersecting into each other, and we're going to just smooth that out in a few minutes, just like we did the other joints. Alright, so now let's smooth this out. So I'm going to go to smooth. With the shoulder joint, I really don't want to, if I start smoothing this out too much, it'll actually add weights to it, and then it's going to actually, it'll continue to collapse a little bit. So I'm going to leave that alone. But I want to smooth out underneath the arm here a little bit. So we'll have to do that on the clavicle bone. And you can even go inside the model. So now we have a pretty nice edge flow that runs underneath the crease of the armpit here. Alright, so let's bounce back out. We'll hit Q on the keyboard. Alright, so now let's bend this arm all the way down. So there's quite a bit of intersecting going on with the bottom of the arm. I just want to make sure that the mesh around here is just more straightened out. It looks kind of tangled up there, and it gives us a weird deformation. So we just want to straighten that out and try and smooth it as much as possible. Alright, so I think that's good for the armpit. I want to make sure that the character can shrug well. So I'll just bring the arm down here, and we'll bring the clavicle up. So somewhere around there, if you can shrug that much, I'd be happy with that. What joint is basically causing all this disruption over here? And I figured out that it's the upper spine. So if we go to the upper spine, you can see the impact that it's having here, the weighting that it's having. So a good way to test it is just to use the smooth tool. So if we go too far over closer to the shoulder joint, it's actually going to give us a negative effect. So really just want to affect the weights for the upper spine joint just in this area. And you'll see if you keep using the smooth tool, basically until you get an effect that you don't want, and you stop using it on that joint, you switch joints. So, and over here it doesn't do anything. We have a collapsed area here. You see the smooth tool doesn't do anything there. So it's probably going to be more like the clavicle or shoulder joint, or even possibly the neck base joint. So sometimes it's a matter of just going to all the nearby joints and just smoothing the whole area out. Sometimes that also works well. So you'll find that you'll get into a situation where, say for example, you smooth the upper spine weights on the shoulder, and it'll pull all the vertices in one direction, and then you go back to the clavicle and smooth the areas in that same area, and it'll pull them in the other direction. So you kind of have to find a happy medium or a happy balance there. Just going to add a little more bulge to the clavicle in this area, just to give us the impression of a shoulder blade. Now if we want to get a little bit of a clavicle swing forward and back, but let's just rotate it back a little bit and see if we can paint out any kind of ugly deformations. And let's just paint that out. Yeah, if we select the upper spine joint, we can see that these weights kind of abruptly end right there. So let's just smooth that out a little bit. Alright, so let's rotate that clavicle back forward. It caves in the front, so we'll just fix that. We're probably going to have to add weights to the upper spine. Alright, so I'll set the clavicle back down to 0. So now we got a shrug in here that's not looking too bad at all. Alright, so we'll pop his arm back up and we'll start working on the elbow. Alright, so the shoulder and clavicle are done. I already went through and did the elbow, and we just do that the same way as we did the knee originally. And I also did the wrist. You want to make sure that you get a nice crease in the top of the wrist, the bottom of the wrist under here. Also you should bend it forward and make sure this crease is looking good, and bend it back, and also paint out this side of the wrist as well. I started on the fingers. It's nice to flip it around like this to work on the fingers, and then just bend each joint individually and do it the same way as we've done every other joint, and just work on each knuckle at a time. The hands are quite a bit of work because obviously there's lots of joints and we're working in a smaller area and the mesh is very tight. It's just a much more intricate task. But the good news is we only have to do one hand because we're going to be mirroring the entire body to the other side. It's a great idea to start with the pinky, and once you have all the creases painted out on the inside and on the outside, it's good to bend the finger all the way in. That way that finger is out of the way and you can more easily work on the side of the next finger. The space between the first knuckle and the second knuckle, right in here, the center part, you want it to be heavily weighted, and also be careful not to paint other fingers. It's a little bit tricky because it's such a small area that we're working in here. If you have some problem areas like this, you can always go inside the geometry and paint it from the inside. So what I like to do with the fingers is just go in between each knuckle and make sure that the center is heavily weighted as I mentioned, and then go ahead and bend it, and oftentimes we get a better result. So I'm just going to shift select all those joints and we'll just start to bend it. So I'll usually bend it about halfway and then work on each knuckle one at a time. And we'll just paint out our creases. On the top of the finger, we can just crank our smooth opacity right up to the top. On the top, it's just usually a matter of smoothing the knuckle areas out. Oftentimes problems like this lumpiness in here can be solved by using the wrist joint to smooth out some of these knuckles. The weighting from the wrist joint extends out pretty far all the way up to the first knuckles, so oftentimes using the smooth tool on the wrist joint will sort out a lot of these issues in the knuckle area. And we'll just get this finger out of the way, and then we'll work on the next finger. And again, the workflow is generally just to go to the first knuckle, make sure you have a heavy weighting all the way around the finger in between the first two knuckles, and then go to the second knuckle, make sure the weighting is heavy all the way around the second knuckle, and it'll fix these little issues. And then go through and start bending the finger, painting out the creases on the bottom of the knuckles, and then the top of the knuckles, and then fix the base area. So we'll just continue doing this for the other two fingers, and I'll chime back in when it comes time to do the thumb. Thumb's a bit of a different story. Alright, so we're going to continue on with the thumb. So we want to get the finger out of the way. So later on when we start to attach control curves to the character, we're going to finesse the paint weights a little bit further, because we're going to set the character up to move in different ways, especially the hands. We're going to be creating some thumb rolls and some pinky rolls. For example, if you touch your thumb to your pinky, we're going to rig the character so they can roll their thumb and pinky inward toward their palm. We're not going to do that now because it involves translating some of these joints. So I don't want to translate these joints around. I really just want to focus on getting all the finger curls working well. But after the character is rigged with control curves, we're going to add some extra dexterity. Then we'll go through and finesse the skin weights further. So I'm going to go ahead and add some weight to this thumb 1 joint, just to paint out this collapsed area. So you can see as I'm painting weights here, it did fill in the collapsed area, but if I try to paint over here, it just pushes it in. So that means we're probably going to have to add weight to the wrist joint for this area. So I want to get rid of this, because this is the worst part of it. So basically I want to remove weighting from one of these joints, but sometimes because we're not removing weights, we're actually adding weights. You actually have to add weights to another joint to take weights away from the joint that you want to. It's probably going to be a matter of adding weights to the wrist joint in order to stop the skin from being pulled out. So we'll just go back to our skin tool. Let's find the wrist joint, and I'll try adding weights to that. So it sometimes requires a little bit of experimentation, especially depending on how your character is rigged. By adding weights to the wrist joint, it's taking weights away from these joints that are surrounding this area. So again, we're just going to do this rough. When the thumb comes out, I want this mesh to sort of spread evenly. So I'm just going to keep painting it until I get it to a point where I think I can start smoothing. Okay, so we're going to work on the third joint, and that's thumb joint 3 on my model. And as usual, the closer you get to the crease, the smaller you have to make your brush. We're going to head on over to the neck area. Now I want to make sure, because there's lots of joints in this area, and I've already shaped the clavicle the way I like it, I also want to make sure that I don't undo what I did already. So I'm just going to bring the clavicle up, and then I'll bend the neck joint. I just want to get the side of the neck for now, so that it mirrors over nice. I can see we have this indentation here, so we're just going to select that. I'm just going to add a little bit of weight to these edges on the clavicle joint. Alright, so I'm just moving up to the middle of the neck. I'm just going to bend that a little bit, and it's actually not too bad. So I'm just going to leave it like that for now. The front of the neck, when we go to bend that back, we'll do that after we mirror the joints, because we're going to be painting in the front here. So I'm just going to go down now and do the torso. So we'll just give it a little bend. We'll find the upper spine joint in our list. Let's add first. I'm going to increase my brush size. So I'm just going to quickly add some weights, and then we'll go through and smooth it after. So I'm going to select the mid spine now, and we're going to add to that. Now I'm going to switch to smooth, and we'll smooth out the weights on the upper spine here. For the torso, it doesn't have to be a really tight crease like it was for the elbow, knees, and fingers, because it's not a joint. So we go to the upper spine and we'll smooth that dark area out. So you can see I'm going up and down the spine. I'm selecting the upper spine, mid spine, and lower spine, and just continuously painting weights, trying to get a smooth, rounded deformation to the side of his torso. And I'm just going to continue doing this with the add function until I get a nice smooth curve here, and then I'll go through and smooth it all out later. Also using the root as I get closer to the bottom of his torso and adding weight to this area. Just working on the upper spine here for a moment. You can see how I'm pushing this area in by adding weight, but if I go too far, it actually pulls it out. So I'll have to affect this area with the next joint. I really want to tone down this bulge here and try and get it as curved as possible. So I'm just going to turn my smoothing up all the way and just try and smooth it all out. Just tone down some of the weighting in this area to get a more smooth, rounded look to the side of the torso here. I'm continuously alternating between the upper and mid, and then the mid and lower, and then the lower back and the root. So I did a layer of adding, I went and did a layer of smoothing, and now I'm going to take a look at it, but I'm going to see if I can round it off even more. Okay, so we're just about through with the side of the torso. In some instances, the replace option for the paint operation also comes in handy to push in certain areas. You want to keep that down low, just like we do when we use the add operation. But you can see with the replace option, it will push in certain areas, and that does come in handy when you're trying to correct some problem areas here. I'm just going to select all these joints and zero them back out again. So we have all the weights painted on the body except for the front of the neck and torso area, and there's still some work to do here and there. But again, we'll revise and refine some of the weight painting after we get the controls put in. Now I want to just get the head. Let's toggle on our X-ray joints. And I'm just going to select the head joint and just move it around and check and see where we could use some weight painting. Because I'm going to be mirroring the paint weights from the left side of his body to the right, I also want to make sure that I get anything on the one side painted as well as possible so that we'll get a good mirror to the other side. I really want to pay attention to the ears here. I can see that the ears are deforming really badly. It's probably because there's weights from some of these joints down here that are pulling on the ear. So what we'll do is we'll add head joint weights to the ear area to ensure that it goes along with the head joint when it's moved. And the same thing with these areas with the jaw. We'll just paint those in white. Let's select our geometry. We'll go to our paint weights tool. Let's go to add. We're going to leave that up a little bit higher this time. As you keep painting over areas, you'll see it return to its regular shape. And then some areas don't move at all, and that means that they're fine. So really you want to just minimize how much you paint and just make sure you're only getting what you really need to get. What I don't want to do is paint in this area because it's going to add weights to the jaw bone, and I want to deal with that separately. So we're just going to paint out areas that actually are deforming in a way that's unappealing. So that's a lot better. Should really check it from all angles. So the whole head's actually deforming. So we're just going to go up to about the halfway point. We're going to mirror these later, of course, so we're just going to paint up to half. And I can see I have all this bungled up area here. It's probably the neck, one of the neck joints. So I can see it's the mid neck, and we'll just use our smooth tool. And I'll go to the head and smoothen out the other side here. I'm going to turn the hair on. I notice that the hair got sunken into the head. That's probably because of the weight from the head joint. I'm going to select the hair, and let's go to our skin weights. We only bound the head joint to the hair, so it's only really being affected by these few joints. But when I rotate the head, I want the hair to go with it completely without deforming at all. So I'm going to click on the head joint here, and I want to just fill this in and add weights to the hair. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about the other side. You can see this is about half the head here. So you want to go over the halfway point just so we get a good mirror. And just test it. Really, we're only concerned about the left side right now. Alright, so I think that's pretty good for now. Let's mirror our skin weights to the other side. And then we'll just go through and refine some of the center areas, some of the areas in the front of his body and directly in the back of his body. And any other little imperfections, we'll just do another pass on everything. So I'm just going to select the skin. We'll go to Skin, Mirror Skin Weights option box. As long as your character is facing the Z axis, you want to make sure you're mirroring across the Y and Z. Basically just means you're going to mirror from left to right. And you want to make sure it's a positive to negative because this is the positive side and this is the negative side. Everything else is fine, so we'll just select mirror. And now let's test it. So I'm just going to test it with the shoulder joint first. So I'm just going to go through and test a few of these joints, especially the fingers, because that was a lot of work and I want to make sure that all that work mirrored over nicely. So we can just shift select all these joints. And yes, all those skin weights mirrored over nice. Okay, so now let's mirror over the hair. I'm just going to select the hair. We'll do the same thing with a skin, mirror skin weights, and we'll just click on it this time. And now if I select the head joint, you should see the ears and the hair should look fine. And let's just test the torso. We know that it looked good on this side, and let's bend it to this side. Perfect. So we'll do the same thing with the front and the back of the torso as we did with the sides. We just want to try and get rid of some of this lumpiness. Alright, so I'm just bending the mid and base of the neck and seeing what happens, and I can see we get some collapsing here. So we're going to fix all that. I'm going to add some mid neck weights to this part of the neck just to round it out a little bit. Okay, so I'm generally happy with that. We're just going to zero out those neck joints and start working on the front and back of the torso. So I'm just going to select all these joints and let's just rotate them forward. So this is going to be the same process that we went through with the side of the torso. Alright, so I'm going to crank up my brush size and we're going to do a level of adding all the way down the front of the torso, and then we'll do a level of smoothing, and then we might have to use the replace tool to push in some areas. Again, I want to make sure that I don't go too close to the side because I've already fixed the sides, and I don't really want to mess around with that too much now. In some of these areas I don't really want to pull them out anymore. So really what I'm trying to achieve is a nice rounded shape. And then I'll go through and just smooth some of this out. And I'm just going to use the replace operation, keeping it pretty low, and we're going to just use it to push in some areas here. And then we're going to go through and smooth this out again. Alright, and I think I'm pretty happy with that, the way that is. So we're going to rotate him back, and we'll do the same thing with his back. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that. It's unlikely that he's going to lean back that far anyways. Alright, so we'll just bend him forward and backward and just check it out. And the torso looks pretty rounded. I think I'm pretty happy with that. That looks fine. And I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, so we'll just zero those joints out. So now I can start working on painting the weights in the jaw area on the face to get the mouth to open and close. This will be the joint that's going to be rotated in order to open the mouth. You can see that it's taking most of the face with it. We want to add some head joint weight to the upper part of the face so that it stays still when we rotate the jaw joint. So let's actually do what we've always done, and let's rotate the jaw open a little bit. Just a little bit, not too much. We'll select the geometry or skin weights tool. So we're going to add weights to the head. Usually we have the opacity down pretty low for when we're adding, but I'm going to bring it up a little higher than usual. I want to actually add full weights to these areas that I don't want to rotate with the jaw. So you just want to paint this whole area out on both sides of the face. Really, you can paint out the entire nose area, but we can paint white almost everything right up into including the upper lip area. Okay, so I'm going to start turning my opacity down a little bit because I do want some movement when the mouth opens. If you look in the mirror and just sort of drop your jaw open, you'll see that some of your upper mouth does lower as well. And you can see our open mouth starting to take shape. So I'm just going to decrease my opacity a little bit. Alright, so if we rotate the jaw joint now, you can see we have the beginnings of him being able to open his mouth. Of course, we have to smoothen all that out. And then we're going to make sure that the corners don't go down as far as well. But we'll just leave it open a little bit, just so we can continue working on it and see the end result. Alright, so I'm just going to go at it with the smooth function now, and then it's just a process of smoothing and adding, continuously smoothing and adding like we've done with the torso and the rest of the model. Okay, so let's rotate the jaw now and just see where we're at. We should actually be in pretty decent shape. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I don't want the corners to come down that much. Alright, so we want to make sure that we're on the head joint. Alright, so I'm just going to add the weights to the corner of the mouse, but you want to make sure that you keep the corners together. You don't want to spread the mesh out for the corners. So what I'm going to do is just sort of go right in the center where the corner is and just dab, just click and bring the whole thing up together. It's a good way to ensure that the mesh just sort of stays together. Instead of having the head selected, if we select the jaw, for example, you can see that it's the opposite. The weights are the opposite of that they are for the head. So then we can just go to the jaw joint. If we've added too much on the head joint, we can select the jaw joint and add to that to reverse what we did with the head. I just painted the corners right back to their original position on the head joint, and now I'm going to go back to the jaw joint and just bring them down a little. This will probably work a little bit better. So now I'm just alternating between the jaw joint and the head joint to bring parts of the lips up or down. And then just repeating the same process as I have with the other parts of the body, where I alternate between those two joints, the jaw and the head. I do a level of adding, and then I do a level of smoothing. As you continue to refine the mouth area, it's a great idea to bring your brush size right down. As you can see how the corner of the mouth sort of gets distorted. So you want to make sure that you're getting that mesh where it's supposed to be. So I'm turning the opacity on the smooth right down so that I don't mess up the mesh on the corners of the mouth too much. And I'm just going to continuously go back and sort of fix the corners and then smooth them out with a lower opacity, just so they don't go back to being all spread out. So I'm adding to the top lip on the head joint, and then I go to the jaw joint and smooth the top lip. Alright, so I'm getting to the point now where I'm going to really fine tune this. I have the head joint selected and I brought my brush way down to the point where I can only affect maybe one point. And I just want to make sure that I get these corners looking as good as possible. And then we're going to just do a real easy smooth on it. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to do is just straighten out the bottom of his jaw here. And I'm actually going to paint a little bit of weight so I can get the jaw moving a little bit, because I can see that when I rotate the jaw here, we don't really get much jaw movement. And I just want to make sure that the jaw moves a little bit. And let's test that jaw rotation again. There we go. So we got some jaw movement, and I'm pretty happy with that. And we're going to mirror the skin weights again. Alright, so let's check the jaw now. It should be the same on both sides. So that's pretty much it for skin weighting. At the end, when you're done, you want to test everything and make sure everything's working well. Just making sure that everything we did is still holding in place. Just giving it a quick check. You can even rotate it in Y, spin them around. You'll see that oftentimes when you do this, you'll find that you'll have to make a few changes here and there. As you can see, skin weighting is a long and laborious process, but once it's finished, it's finished. And now we're ready to start adding control curves to our character. And even after the control curves are added, rather than selecting the joints, we'll be able to use the control curves to easily put our character into various poses. And there'll probably be some further tweaks to make to some of the skin weighting here and there.